Right. Boker Tov.
Boker Tov.
How are you?
I'm a little confused. So I just got home from the farm market, so I have to put stuff away and make breakfast. So I'm going to have my video off. But
Completely cool.
and then I'll turn it on once I'm settled. My confusion is this an ongoing class, or is this a
No, not
one-off?
exactly. This is it. This is with me, it's a one-off. There were 3 Sundays in a row. This is the last one of Get Ready for the High Holy Days.
I see. Okay.
So,
Thank you. That clears up my confusion. I am going back on silent mode to continue putting away groceries and getting breakfast together. Thank you for
Love it.
being patient and understanding.
Any old time. Yay. I have actually, and Phyllis has joined us, thank you. I have made you both co-host only with the hope that you will help admit people. Just if you see a name flashing, because while I'm teaching and looking for materials, it can be hard to follow.
Just, I'm on it.
Awesome, bless you, thank you.
It's like my video game.
It really is, right? It becomes second nature, yeah. All right. Meanwhile, good morning, everyone. Pulling up, albeit slowly. Why does this keep happening? Pulling up the handout. And with apologies, this may take a moment. There we go. Okay. Boker Tov. Favor, if anyone has the URL for the source sheets and would be so kind as to put it in the
I
chat.
already did, Fred.
Oh, bless your heart. Thank you. I'm trying to do this with a broken computer and a phone screen. So apologies for the tech. At least it's better than yesterday morning for those who were trying to follow that one. We are working on our hybridity. So thank you. And right. There's no close participants. Excellent. Ya na 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 na. Ya na 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 ya na. Achat sha'alti met Adonai ota avakesh. Achat sha'alti met Adonai ota avakesh. Shivti bevet Adonai. Shivti bevet Adonai kol yemei chayai, kol yemei chayai, lachazot benoam, benoam Adonai, ulevaker behechalo, lachazot benoam, benoam Adonai, ulevaker behechalo. Boker Tov, Shavua Tov, and as of last night, we can say Shana Tova because we're in the home stretch. So with appreciation, Phyllis has posted the in the chat the link for the sources that we're going to look at. I began with Achat Sha'alti from Psalm 27, the classic Elul Psalm, because it gets to something bigger than simply Cheshbon HaNefesh. To be clear, in preparation for these holidays, previous sessions looked deeply with adults at the liturgy, looked with kids and families at what the whole thing could be about, and today the focus is a little more meta on how and why to go deep into ourselves, to search our soul, as it were, our deeds, and look for patterns and figure out ways to be better, the tshuva model. But even bigger than that is the question of why we're here. Mark and Renee, our special guests last night at Slichot, had some beautiful perspective on this question, hearkening back to God in the Garden of Eden calling out to the first human, Ayeka, where are you? A sort of timelessly resonant question. So where we are, why we're doing all this, Achat Sha'alti basically asks us, what's the one thing that matters most? Achat Sha'alti, the one thing I ask of you, O God. The psalmist's answer is to sit in the house of God all of my days. Beautiful answer. We could do worse. That may not be the first answer that comes to most of our minds, but the idea of tuning into what matters most, that's above all the invitation today. So starting big and then getting a little more detailed, would anyone like to share something that they have come to realize through perhaps the Cheshbon HaNefesh of recent weeks of Elul, or perhaps the last 18 months, or perhaps the last many decades on life? We'll take all the accumulated wisdom that's out there. What really matters? Do you have an answer parallel to that of the psalmist? One thing I ask of you, O God, one thing I seek. Fill in the blank. Give a moment for people to think about it. If you can use the electronic raise hand, I will see you sooner than the physical. But just take a moment and reflect. What is the one thing, or two or three, that you deeply seek? Fran, please.
First of all, I apologize that I'm not on screen yet, but I will be shortly. I'm eating breakfast. And I think that what really stands out for me is I've always thought relationships were important, but over the course of the last, it's more than 18 months, but whatever it is, I mean, I've stopped counting. I realized that the real deep connection with other humans is very, very important, and possibly the most important thing for me.
Nice.
So it's loving connection, which in the way I've been taught, we can translate into chesed. Just so,
Amen.
dibarti.
Love it. Thank you. Meaningful connection, right? Just connect. The one thing that matters, I think Fran probably speaks for a lot of us. Anyone else? The one thing we ask, the one thing that matters most.
Hi, Rabbi Fred. I can't tell if you can see that I've got my hand up too. It's a great question. And I think that in the past 18 months, it's been so difficult, but so important to remember what is happening in the world. I think that the pandemic has reinforced our bubble, and it can make us lose sight of the fact that there's some things that are fortunate for us that are not fortunate for other people. And so it's that idea of paying attention to your own world, but also seeing a bigger picture and remembering that there are some blessings we have that not everyone has, and to act from that place.
Love it. So perhaps perspective is the one thing that we most ask for, or even balance. Hopefully that incorporates the connection that Fran talked about, and it also brings in some additional angles. So thank you, very nice. One more perhaps? Although it's going to be hard to top connection and perspective, but if anyone wants to try. All right. So off to the races with our sources.
Actually, sorry, Rabbi Fred, I see that Amy has her hand up and maybe Claude.
Thank you. So with apologies, as I said, I am logging on a phone. So I cannot see faces and I cannot track chat unless it flashes at a moment that I'm looking. So with huge apologies. In fact, between Shauna and Phyllis, if you would like call those out, that would be amazing. Thank you so very, very much. Okay, said Claude and Amy. So either, please. Just ask people to unmute themselves. I believe you have that power.
Okay.
Hello.
So I wanted to say that a good internet connection is important during the pandemic, and it's allowed for the connections that we've all made. And as Shauna said, it's not available to everybody. But the other thing I want to say that I really valued is the learning that we've had from the rabbis and other people this last year, because it's enriched my life so much. And I've learned so much, and I've also connected to people through the learning. So very much appreciate that. Very much helped my quality of life.
Thank you. It means so much that we've been able to do a piece of what we stand for. What's our collective mission as a shul, despite the limitations of the last year and a half. Thank you, Amy. Claude.
Claude's having computer problems, so he's
Okay.
he can't hear.
Brenda, then.
Sorry.
Can you ask it for him?
Linda,
What do you?
no, he
Claude.
can't talk.
Okay, no.
Claude, we can hear you now.
Miracle of miracles. Okay, I would say
No, we can't. Sorry.
We could hear when Linda unmuted herself. Claude came through Linda's computer.
okay.
Okay, Claude is giving up. So I don't know what he wanted to say. So let's move on. Thank you.
Well, maybe that's
Okay.
the lesson that he wanted to share ironically with Fred.
Yeah.
I love it. Right.
Good.
The one thing I ask for is to know when to stop. Right. That's some deep Torah there. Thank you. All right. So again, in the chat is the link to 9 pages of sources. We are probably not going to get to all of them, but I got so excited after coming up with the idea of Cheshbon HaNefesh that I just like, oh, there's so much there. And so thank you, Phyllis, for reiterating. If you can pull that up on any device, great. If not, I'm going to read aloud or ask for volunteers, and we're going to move through this. But first, working definition of Cheshbon HaNefesh. Anyone want to give it a try? I'm certainly here to step in, but Shelley, please.
I've heard you, I believe I've heard you define it as soul accounting. Am I right?
Yes.
Oh,
You
my
heard
memory
me.
is not as bad as I thought.
And her husband's a CPA.
Yasher koach. And yes, Jerry, I'm glad you're on, because it is quite literally the CPA approach to the soul. And I say that advisedly because so many of us who are not accountants or actuaries or even professional data crunchers in tech or finance, for so many of us, we don't stop to think about that exactitude. We care more about the exactitude of relationship or of ethics, and all of that is important, but it's easy to miss the quantifiable. It's easy to miss the patterns because we also know the unconscious biases that we bring to examinations of our own behavior. This requires opening the books. This is a full-on audit. And that model, that analogy is actually worth holding on to. Dan, I saw your hand.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to add 2 things to that. One, which is the word accountability, not just accounting like a list of things, but accountability, that during this time of year, we want to say, you know, we want to list things, but also we need to do something about it. So that's the other way I think of the word cheshbon. But the second thing is, and I don't know whether this is in any of the liturgy or anything, but to look at the positive things, the stuff on the asset side of the accounting, the things we did well this past year, the things we succeeded in, the relationships we fostered, you know, all the good stuff. But usually at this time of year, we're thinking about all the things that we failed to do, either by, you know, commission or omission. But I'm wondering how much we should or could think about the good stuff too, as a balance sheet.
Yes. Beautiful. Reb Nachman of Bratslav 200 years ago did go in that direction. It's been picked up on in recent years. And the last couple of years, we've added to our liturgy, along with Ashamnu, all the places, oh, you look at where we've messed up. You know, we've been awesome. We are blessed. We are compassionate. We are diligent. Right, and kind of make your own acronym there. And thank you, Fran. I see chesed and self-care absolutely needs to be part of it. This is the key balancing act, is how to do the sober assessment of our shortcomings from a place of strength, right? If all we focus on is the negative, we don't have the inner reservoir of emotional or spiritual strength with which to pursue the remedies. So the two need to be yoked to each other. That said, it's also very easy in today's kind of vibe of positivity, new age era, to end up over focusing on the positive. I noted that last night, actually, at Slichot, for the handful of us who were there, we made a lot of individual choices that reflected this positive theme, and we never ended up doing either Ashamnu or Alchet, which is traditional at Slichot, to start this, right? So it's very easy to go too far in one direction or the other. And as many of you know, Chesed is precisely that midah on the Kabbalistic chart that is the opposite from judgment or justice, right? And so the world, we're taught, is actually held in balance by this creative tension between justice and mercy, between judgment and compassion. And we need to strike that balance.
Yeah.
So.
Sorry, Rabbi Fred, I wanted to add something coming off this and Dan's comments too, and that is, I think that there are a lot of studies that show that people who can't forgive themselves are often harsher to other people. And so that's also part of that tension that you're talking about. It's not so much to praise ourselves, but that kind of forgiveness that we can offer ourselves and that kindness we can offer ourselves is often what makes us offer that to other people.
Nice. Thank you. Right on. So it's not only the inner strength that we need to consciously develop, it's chesed as a midah, as an attribute that if that's truly part of our personality, then that is our single biggest sort of odds improver of being able to do the work and live the life that we ought to. And we're going to be dancing back and forth between the High Holy Day concept of Cheshbon Nefesh and the Musar concept, because they are very much intertwined. So thank you so much for that, Shana. Right. Unless any other hands are immediately up. All right. So we're studying Torah. The sheet hopefully is in front of you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshenu v'yasatav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed is the one who lifts us up through the instruction to immerse ourselves in concepts of Torah. La'asok b'divrei Torah. So, in the Talmud, page 1 at the top, Amar Rav Kruspadai, one of the better named of the Talmudic sages, Rav Kruspadai said, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Shlosha Sfarim Niftachin for Rosh Hashanah. 3 separate books are open on Rosh Hashanah. We're actually studying the earliest reference. There's nothing about a book on Rosh Hashanah in the Torah. This is the Talmud at the earliest layers. Rabbi Yochanan is early 2nd century, talking about the idea of books and Rosh. So this is where all those images, most famous for us from the medieval prayer Unetane Tokef, who shall live and who shall die, who by fire and who by water, that is all coming out of the tradition that basically starts here. But there's a nuance when it's presented here. So there are these 3 books, Echad Shel Risha'im Gemorim. One book is just filled with the names of the entirely wicked. What a sad thing that there are enough of them to fill a book with. Entirely wicked. That's huge. That doesn't mean 80-20, right? Or 60-40, right? Gemorim, wholly, entirely, unsalvageably wicked. V'echad shel Tzadikim Gemorim, and a second book is filled with the names of the thoroughly righteous. Ve'echad shel Beinonim, and the third is with all of us, the in-between folks. And of course, later teaching says, never be so haughty as to assume that you're in the fully righteous category, and never be so despairing that you believe you are in the entirely wicked category. So we need to treat ourselves at every moment and everyone we encounter as one of the Beinonim, one of the in-between folk, right? So the entirely righteous, of course, boom, you go upstairs. No questions asked. The holy wicked, boom, you die. But for the rest of us, these middling people left with their judgment, we need every day of Elul, and we need every day of these 10 days of repentance, because with the hyper focus of those days, Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, those deeds matter even more, since our fate remains effectively undecided. If we merit, then the explanation that's given here, some of you recognize this approach to Talmud that the Davidson Talmud and the Steinsaltz have opened up, which is that the bold is the verbatim, and the unbolded text is to make it into full sentences for modern English speakers. So there's an active interpretation in the unbolded, but it tends to be consensus. So what does it mean to merit? The good deeds and the mitzvot that we are performing during those 10 days. If we merit thusly, we are written for life. If we do not merit, we are written for death. So that's the starting point for the imagery of the season and the need for focused tshuva during those 10 days. And then, of course, it spread to be Elul as the preparatory month, of which we have 8 days remaining. Before opening to discussion, the real reason that I wanted to bring that text in was this beautiful piece attributed to the Baal Shem Tov, the first Hasidic Rebbe, early 18th century, who I'm sorry, it came out of the Baal Shem Tov, and then one of his much later disciples in the wing that melded Kabbalah and Musar. So fast forward now to about 1900, and in Slonim, a town in Eastern Europe, which became one of the 3 great centers of Musar, was a sort of more Kabbalistically oriented approach. Others were less so. So this comes out of the traditions of the Baal Shem Tov, but is actually from Reb Shalom Noach of Slonim, who is quoting yet another rabbi in the Toldot Yaakov Yosef. This teaching, 3 books opened on Rosh Hashanah. So what does it actually mean that they're open? What does that matter? What's important, teaches the Slonimer Rebbe, is that each person writes his or herself into whichever book they choose. This is building on the line from Unatana Tokef, when it talks about V'tiftach et Sefer HaZichronot, God opens the book of remembrances, Chot Miyad, and the seal, the impression, which is the official version of the signature, right? The notary seal that goes with the signature, Chotam Yad, Kol Adam Bo. Every signature of every person is already in that book. God, as it were, sees, knows everything, records everything. God is therefore, in this view, objectivity. Probably one of the many names of God that you haven't thought of before, right? Baruch atah objectivity, right? But that is, in a sense, what we're saying. We are inherently subjective. We are limited in our capacity to hold on to and analyze information. God is symbolic of the realm of pure thought and pure relationship. We will never get there, but we're trying to get as close as possible.
Fred, a timeout, please. A technology timeout. You were frozen, we think. So it really made us good listeners. On the other hand, your voice was crackling a lot. So it made it hard to be great understanders.
I thank you. So
It may be
I'm
helpful,
resetting
Fred.
up in my little downstairs office closer to the
I-
window. How's that?
Yeah,
And
Better?
if the problem persists, I would suggest you just turn off the video.
Fair enough. Thank you. Okay, I appreciate that. The Zoom challenges of broadcasting from a loud house. So bring the computer over. All right.
let's relanguage that to a normal house.
Thank you. Friendly amendment accepted. Okay. So again, Chotam Yad, the notarized signature of Kol Adam Bo, is in the Book of Remembrances. And so the Slonimer is focusing on that image, middle of page 1. Every person writes his or herself into whichever book they choose. So if one takes upon themselves to be counted among the righteous, to fulfill their role and destiny in the world from this time forward, that is the very process of being written and sealed in the book of life. The same goes for the other levels too, because after all, if a person does not take on their role and destiny in life for the coming year, what role do they have? So this echoes that opening question from Machat Sha'alti. What matters most? What is your role and destiny in life? And I bring this in, and then I'll call on Dan, because this is the balance of Cheshbon HaNefesh. At one level, it is the actuarial work, the CPA approach. Leave no stone unturned and make sure every receipt is accurate and accounted for. And at the same time, the big picture. Who are we? Why are we here? What and who do we stand for? What is our role and destiny in life? We've got not that many days to try our best to work on both. That is the challenge. That is the blessing. That is the opportunity. That's why we're here this morning. Dan, please.
So I'm a little confused. The first reading has to do with the past year, of whether we did good or bad, the balance sheet and all that. And God looks at it and judges.
She might want to go with you.
The second one looks like it's promissory for the next year. I promised to do good. I'm going to be this coming year righteous. So I'm a little confused.
No, it's a very good point. Remember your second grade report card where you could get an A for effort and a C for achievement, right?
Mhm.
So God is a kindergarten teacher who honors and sees the potential as well as the actual. And that is the line that we walk. We hear it again at Kol Nidre. It's not entirely clear whether we're saying all the vows we made last year or are the vows we will make this year. Either way, it applies because God knows our actual and knows our potential. Our koach and our poal, those are terms that the medievals talked a lot about, drawing from Aristotle, etc. So the actual and the potential both matter. And so we need the careful accounting. But what's nice to know is when it comes to the great audit on high, as important as it is that we have triple checked our math and not left any income out of our reportable column, that nonetheless, we will be judged with compassion, seeing our potential, seeing our intent. And so Dan is absolutely right to note that, and there's actually some insight in the why. So thank you for that. Amy.
I just wanted to ask how the Reconstructionists define the book of life, or do we? I don't want to turn this into taking over the whole session, but okay, so what's the traditional interpretation of the book of life exactly? I mean, is it seen as an actual book in the sky, a ledger?
Some of you have heard me say this before with no disrespect for our friends of other religious traditions, but if you take these metaphors literally, then God is an old white man wearing red and who lives at the North Pole. He knows if you've been sleeping, he knows if you're awake, he knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake, right? It is the most simplistic version of what our tradition calls schar va'onesh theology. Schar is reward, onesh is punishment. And that is Pavlovian. That is essentially saying condition ourselves so that we choose right, because there's somehow an instantaneous feedback loop that, between the reward and the punishment, or else you get coal in your stocking, right? That's the image. Tradition at times feels very much that way, but at times, even long before Reconstructionism, really looked at it as a metaphor. And the deeper strands, the Maimonides, for instance, right? The people who became the intellectual antecedents for Kaplan, and even for Heschel and others in 20th century theology, they all got that this is metaphor. You can hold on to a corner of belief or hope that maybe there's something literal behind the screen, but you'll never know that with certainty. And we don't have a Toto to go tugging at the curtain and reveal the wizard behind the curtain, right? We don't expect to ever see the wizard. And so for us, we need to treat the wizard and all of the wizardry as metaphor, with a great humility of how little we can ultimately know of what makes the universe tick. So the short answer is metaphor. The long answer is metaphor plus. Great. All right. Were there any other hands at this juncture? Right. So at the bottom of page 1, we're not going to spend
Shelley and
time
Jerry
with
had their hand.
Oh,
Sorry,
thank you.
Shelley.
Sorry.
It's okay. I can ask it later. No, I'll ask it later.
You sure? All right. So a little Jackson Brown shout out, Lives in the Balance. This is Maimonides, who we're talking about, of course, 12th century, Spanish origin, lived his life in Egypt, in dialogue with the leading Muslim intelligentsia of the day. And he reminds us of what all of this is for. So yes, he says, top of page 2, blowing the shofar is a scriptural statute, but it's a metaphor. It's symbolic. It's not about a ram. It's not about a sound, right? It is symbolic for, as if to say, you who sleep, bestir yourselves. You who slumber, emerge. Examine your conduct. Turn in repentance. Remember your creed. Love this line. This is tshuva in short. Examine your conduct. Turn in repentance. Remember your creator. And I think that order is important because it's very easy in much of Jewish thought, which tends to be pretty God-centric, that we lead with the remember your creator. That's hard for us moderns, for people steeped in empiricism and skepticism. If we treat it as first examine your conduct, okay, that's data, I can do that. Then it's turn in repentance. Oh, that's harder. That's getting into the psychosocial and spiritual realms, but okay, I know that's what I got to do. And then once you have done both of those and are the improved person, Then remember your creator and say, oh, that was a godly process. Rinse, lather, repeat, because we're always gotta be doing chesbon hanefesh. So if that was all we got from Maimonides, yay. Examine your conduct, turn in repentance, remember your creator. But the vanities of the times mean that we may forget the truth and err by pursuing the things that don't matter, the fashions of the day, which don't benefit, which are not salvific. Don't let your attention be distracted by the ups and downs of the stock market or of American Idol or of, right? I mean, even the weather. And I say that advisedly as our hearts are heavy for the Gulf Coast today. There's so much up and down, and it's so easy to have misplaced focus. And we need to try our best. Part of Cheshbon HaNefesh is to keep ourselves focused on the questions that matter the most. Care for your souls, improve your ways and your tendencies. By the 19th century, when modern Musar comes around, there's already a debate about whether Maimonides really deserved credit for having invented Musar, right? Because Maimonides did everything else, so why not this too? And here you hear that to care for your souls means to improve your ways, but even more your tendencies. The idea of developing your character, developing your internal moral spine, in addition to examine your conduct and turn in repentance. This is that field of ideas of Cheshbon HaNefesh that I wanted to make sure we got to look at. And as if that weren't enough, this same passage from Maimonides goes on to be one of his most famous and enduring teachings, that we don't know where we are. And it is therefore necessary for each person to behold themselves throughout the entire year as if they are evenly balanced between innocence and guilt. The bolded section halfway through the paragraph, top of page 2. We must look upon the entire world as if evenly balanced between innocence and guilt. Thus, if we commit one sin, we may overbalance ourselves and the whole world onto the side of iniquity and non-redemption and be a cause of its destruction. But if we perform one mitzvah, one sacred, important, good duty, behold, we may overbalance ourselves and the whole world onto the side of virtue, and will bring about for us and for others salvation and escape. Really an incredible teaching, as if the cosmic constant, right? Physics has this debate about the exact speed of the expansion of the universe and what may happen tens of billions of years from now. And the odds of it getting to a point where it slows down and slows down and slows down until it slowly reaches steady state and it's exactly balanced so that it doesn't then slowly inch back on itself and create a new Big Bang hundreds of billions of years later. That's actually being discussed as one of the possibilities, that out of the quintillions and zillions of units of matter out there, that somehow the ledger could actually be balanced such that one atom would make the difference. We may look at a world of 7.5 billion people and say, what does my little choice have to do with it? By this teaching, everything. If you're looking for why Cheshbon HaNefesh matters, Maimonides is giving a metaphysical frame to answer that question. And if you feel that you need a little urgency, a little push to take this work as seriously as it deserves, despite all the other things you have to do in the next 8 days to Rosh Hashanah and the 9 days thereafter to Yom Kippur, remember, Maimonides, the whole world is balanced. It's all up to you. No pressure. Thoughts so far? Anyone? Okay, Dan?
So I'm a little confused though, when he says, behold yourself throughout the whole year. Does that mean we should be doing teshuvah or going through some process every day, every week, every month?
Bing, 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 bing. Yes, unequivocal yes. Remember, in the traditional Amidah, 3 times a day, 6 days a week, we beat our chest, and we do this. You know, there are 2 of the 19 stanzas of the weekday Amidah are about tshuva. It's supposed to be part of daily practice. Musar took it a step further and said, if you don't keep a journal, if you don't figure out mnemonic devices to really remember, it will be too easy to forget, and your cheshbon will not be accurate. So just as any good accountant will say, the most important thing is, what is your filing system, right? If you get me all the information accurately, I can process it accurately. But if you have lost the receipts and you don't remember it anymore, then you've already lost the game. And so the most important thing is to be tracking this constantly, even obsessively. And only if you err on the side of obsessive ethical self-focus will then the other voice kick in, which is everything in moderation. And, you know, don't obsess too far. But I dare say most of us in modernity, with the busyness of our lives and the multiplicity of opportunity of where to put our attention and our energies, including universes just on this screen, right? Because you could dial off of this and onto Netflix or Hulu or God knows what. There's a world out there. And so really, most of us still need to be obsessing a little more over those ethical receipts. And if it ends up being too much, call me for a pastoral consult. Okay. Anyone else? Shelley, please.
You've just discussed basically and answered the question that I had thought of before, which was why we do this once a year. Why the emphasis on a once a year assessment. And I think a lot of Jews who are High Holy Day Jews only, so to speak, have no clue that this is an ongoing process that is addressed in our liturgy, in our services, as you mentioned, the Amidah, the daily Amidah, etc. And quite honestly, I feel like if we did practice it, and if it was more of our in our mindset on a daily basis, I know for myself, I wouldn't feel the kind of intensity right now that I'm feeling about preparing for Rosh Hashanah. And maybe that intensity is a good thing, but somehow it feels, this year, it feels almost burdensome. Maybe because it's been a tough time, but I'm feeling really burdened right now, and anxious about catching up and doing right where I have done wrong, and I haven't felt that in years past, I have to say. So I'm thinking maybe it's part of the whole I don't know what, anyway.
Can I say something? It's like balancing your checkbook every month. You should look at it every month and see if you've got money in the bank or if you're running a deficit.
Mr. CPA.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
just talking about it rather than maybe once a year. This way you can see where you're going every month.
Let me go further, and then Fran and then Linda. But Jerry, thank you so much for that. You work with scores of clients around this. Have you ever noticed a pattern between people's stress level in early April and how much they were doing this weekly or monthly over the course of the year?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everybody kind of does it at the very end.
Right. So to state the obvious, those who do balance their checkbook, those who do have a good system for their receipts, then April becomes the artificial date on the calendar to once a year put it all together, look for patterns, and submit. But it's not a stressful act. It's just the annual point in a cycle of daily, weekly, and monthly activity. Musar is the discipline that does that for tshuva. And without the discipline of daily, weekly, monthly, the annual becomes incredibly scary and anxiety filled. There's another angle though, right? Which is that when there's anxiety out there in a pandemic year, right? Or when there's a deepening sensitivity in our own self to wanting to do better. If we made our standards higher in the last year, then we're going to be a little more stressed heading into this Rosh Hashanah because we're taking it a little more seriously, because those metaphors are now more central to who we are. So there's a lot of factors that can lead to the annual anxiety for the, using the 10th of Tishrei as the parallel to the 15th of April. But really, it's a very similar set of activities. And really, it calls for year-round practice. Thank you. Fran, Linda.
So I wanted to just share sort of a parallel process, if you will. I think of the tension around all of this at this time of year as kind of being a kick in the pants, a reminder, a heavy duty reminder, even though I have been actually doing some work all year. And my parallel is going on a silent retreat. So you all know me, and I have a pretty robust meditation practice. And I love going on a week-long silent retreat with really good teachers because it enhances my regular daily practice. And so that's one of the things that I really missed in the pandemic is no more in-person retreats. But so it's like jump starting.
Nice. Beautiful. Thank you. Because the spiritual life and the ethical life ultimately should overlap. And if they don't, we got trouble, right? There's dangerous
hand in glove
solipsistic spirituality out there that is not ethical enough. And there's a harsh approach to ethics that doesn't nourish the soul, that isn't ultimately sustainable. And so the parallel with silent retreats and meditation and the inner life in that sense, right? These are both manifestations of an inner life, right? So yeah, right on. Thank you so much. Linda.
Well, Fred, you took my line way back. Musar is basically a discipline and a practice. And Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are a communal time when we're all doing it together, which is really supporting and sustaining. I love the idea of it's all a metaphor, but it's so amazing to do this as a community and be sharing the silence and the prayers and just being interbeing people. Buddhism calls it interbeing, when we're just really so interconnected to each other. So that's what this Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur really does, is reinforcing the daily practice, the toolbox, the discipline, and all the good ways that Musar teaches us to do that. Picking out measures, is what they call the simplicity, the silence, the humility, and all those things.
And we're about to get to the midot. Thank you so much. Interbeing, right? It's all about right relationship. And that is right relationship with ourselves, with others, with creation, and with the creator. And all of, if you frame it that way, then all the metaphors of the High Holy Days are actually Buddhist, right? It is all about interbeing and all about reorienting toward right relations. So thank you so much. Jerry, you wanted to add? Was that, sorry? No? Okay.
Shauna wanted to say
Sorry,
something.
I was muted, yeah.
Oh.
Sorry, which
Okay.
Jerry?
Okay. Oh, I just saw the name flash. Either.
Yeah, that was me. That was me, yeah. I just want to ask, and sorry if I missed it, but the going through the year obviously makes a lot of sense, but also how do you get the long-term view? Sometimes at the end of the year, you can look back and see things that you can't see as you go, right? And is there something about the daily, the weekly that lets you still have that kind of longer-term view, some kind of cumulative long-term view, or any comments on that? Because otherwise, you know, I might say, oh, I gave $10 today. That's good, right? But maybe a month later or a year later, you go, well, that really didn't do much, or I could have done more, or something, right? That you don't see, right, as you're going. So that's my question.
You know,
You are so right, and that is such an awesome question. So in Musar terms, the more you go into it, after you focused on this attribute, and then this one, and then this one, and you go back through the cycle, then the more the patterns start to emerge, because you've sort of imprinted in your subconscious to be thinking in this way. And you already know that in 3 weeks, you're going to move on to this attribute. And so you can link your generosity over here with your fear over here. And then you can do an analysis of how do I approach money and tzedakah, and right. And you can do much more the more you do this. The other answer is this is the dance between the ongoing and the annual, right? If all you do at April is submit your taxes, because once a year you need to get all your receipts in one place, Dayenu, you've met the legal definition. But if you don't, while you already have all your year's receipts out, if you don't stop and check and say, how's the household budget going? What are the patterns? Did I give as much to tzedakah this year as I did the years before? Where are the financial tea leaves pointing? And how much more generous can I be, right? That's the goal. And it's hard to do in the daily or the weekly, because yes, I gave X to this great organization for the day. Dayenu, you're yotze, as we say in halachic speak. You have met your obligation, and you don't need to think about it anymore today, right? But you need to be always thinking about generosity, which is a commandment, but it's also a midah. It's an attribute. So the more we work on ourselves and use the ongoing practice together with the annual checkup and collation and submission and pattern recognition, then we'll be in good shape. Does that answer, Jerry? Ish?
Sorry, yeah, sorry, I'm bad with the new button. Yes, thank you.
But all right, no, awesome. And thank you for that, because yes, the piece about patterns is vitally important. I'm gonna run through pages 2 and 3. Just look at the headings. Restitution, you have to, obviously, with tshuva, there's real implication. And it also helps to bring the psychospiritual angle of empathy and pathos. You've got to feel it. You've got to feel the pain that you've caused in order to deeply get to a place where it will offend you. It will offend you if you do that again to someone else, right? As opposed to waiting for someone else to say, that offended me. And on a good day, you'll say thank you. And on a bad day, you'll get defenses up, right? But the ultimate goal is to get to the point where before you do something that offends someone else, you realize that would offend me if I said that or did that. That's developing this inner sensitivity. And the accounting in this metaphor happens sooner or later. I love this passage again from the Talmud in Ta'anit, interpreting this verse of Tzaddik v'Yashar, who God is righteous and upstanding, right? So the sages said, at the very moment that you die, all your deeds are enumerated before you. They're suddenly visible again, all in one place. It's that same metaphor of, oh my God, I forgot. I got that $500 check out of the blue that should have been taxable. It came last January. 15 months later, April of the next year, I'd completely forgotten it. Ay, 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 right? So that, right? Anything you forgot, it's going to be there. Everything, the hour that you die. Wow. And the deeds themselves testify. The deeds are objective. The deeds are data. And the deeds will say, you did this in this way at this time. And the person says, yes. And the deeds say, right? So the deeds are kind of the prosecutor because they're also the data, right? Sign the statement that this is correct, and the person signs it as it is stated. And here's the verse in Eov, in Job, that becomes the proof text for that image from Unatana Tokef about every person's seal, notarized signature is on it. God makes the hand of every person sign. Poetic language in Job 37, but rendered here as the facts speak for themselves. And not only that, but even after you've been shown, the person justifies the judgment upon themselves. The nature of the world to come is when this objective evidence is presented, suddenly we will see ourselves as we really are, not as we thought we were. And we will say back to the deeds, you have judged well. Sooner or later in this metaphor, the book of deeds, the book of remembrances, the full ledger will be in front of us. Sooner or later, we will have to accept its veracity. Better sooner than later. Anything else on this, or on to Musar?
Dan has a hand up.
Okay, please, Dan.
So, yeah, this idea about empathy and pathos in terms of feeling the pain, remorse, feeling bad, that's sort of how I think of the, if you're not in the book of life, I don't like the idea of the book of death, but I sort of see it as the book of miserableness. If you don't do these things right, you will be miserable. You will be racked, or should be racked, with guilt and regret and pain. You're not going to have a good year. So that's one way that I think about it. It helps me with the metaphor. But my question is about, the other day did a little exercise, I think based on Reb Nachman, which was to talk out loud. for X amount of minutes, and just sort of stream of consciousness about things. And what it made me think of is that all this work that we're talking about seems to be internal. And, you know, whether it's during the Amida during the week or whether it's on Yom Kippur, whatever, is there a value? Is there a system? Is there a method for talking out loud about your cheshbon nefesh? Because I think there's a whole different psychological validity to saying it, maybe with somebody else there, you know, a witness, as opposed to a therapist or a priest.
So this is the beauty of Musar practice, right? Which we're getting to here, bottom of page 3, progress. So Musar practice depends on daily thinking, right? In the morning, you set an intention with a focus phrase and a midah that you're working on. In the evening, you jot down some thoughts, and that is the written form of this. But there's a school of thought within Musar that says that you should do this sort of stream of consciousness talking until the nugget emerges. It's called hitpa'alut, or hispilus in Ashkenazis. And then you record the insights in a journal, right? So yes, talking aloud it's a tool. It's only one of many tools. It could be a really good tool. Experiment with it. And then at least weekly, you should be talking it through with someone else. And the act there is less about the talking than it is about the encountering. But there's an element of both there too. So again, these are all tools. There's a lot of ways to get to the goal of an examined and enlightened and full life. And if that's the goal, or even oneness with God would be the extreme version of that goal, there's a lot of intermediate steps and a lot of ways to get there. And that is certainly one. So Ellen
Hey, Rabbi
Marina,
Fred, there's one
Yes.
other person who wanted to say something, and it happens to be me.
thank you,
So-
Donna, please. Yeah.
You know, thinking about that idea of the book of miserableness, you know, one thing that really puzzled me when I was a little girl, not that I studied Torah as a little girl, but you learn, you know, your stories in Sunday school, and it's like, why is everyone in our tradition so flawed? You know, every single forefather, foremother, or however it is, you know, what shouldn't this book be about people who are already perfect and who we want to emulate? And, you know, that's a little girl's thought. And, you know, when I think of the book of, you know, now I'm always going to be thinking about the book of miserableness as this thing in the middle. But there's also, I don't want to say some comfort in that, but there's also like a recognition of humanity there that can help us put things in perspective. We're not meant to be perfect. We're not based on a perfect tradition or perfect people, but the idea of constantly evolving and learning, whether it's from our own errors or from other things that happen. So I just wanted to say that.
Beautiful. Thank you. That stands on its own, and I see that inspired Phyllis to raise her hand.
I never thought I would take away the CPA Jerry version of wisdom tied in with Fred, but what connected for me, and I know you Hebrew speakers do this brilliantly in other languages, but the relationship between the word accounting and accountability. And there are so many other faith or practices that ask people to take account and apologize, but an apology that doesn't have action associated with it, which is what I would see as accountability, is like confessing to a priest and having that be enough. And I say that only because I used that metaphor with Fred once when I said I wanted to talk with him. I said, I think I have a confession. So I'm really walking away with, no, I'm not walking anywhere, sorry. I'm I will be leaving our box with a relationship between those two words, which again is very Musar-like, and seeing it on a spectrum and saying that I have to be not just acknowledge, but to be accountable and move away from my own smelly backpack and at least clean it up a little bit better for the next lap.
Nice.
I think only one metaphor really needed to be in that whole little blurb.
But it was all good. But thank you for refocusing us on accounting and accountability. And you know, there's a lesson here. Some of us are detail people, some of us are big picture people, very few of us are both. And the real lesson here is you've got to strive harder to be both, which means put energy into the one that isn't your natural default setting. If you are already a big picture person, make sure you've got the details right that inform that big picture. And if you're a detail person, make sure that you stop and look for the patterns, how they add up, and why all those details matter. Accountability and accounting. Nice. So, thank you. So bottom of page 3, and I think this may be about as far as we're going to get today. Looking around, I know that some of you are Musar practitioners and have read Alan Marinus and have heard lots of us, myself included, talk about it. Others, this may be newer. But I can't think about Cheshbon HaNefesh as a term that is long older than 2 centuries. Without thinking about it as a key work in the development of early Musar, because these disciplines have everything to do with each other. Again, Musar is the idea of that daily practice that goes beyond saying it in the Amidah, but really developing these traits with a focus on our deeds that is ideally daily. So Alan Marinus writes, this is a standalone piece he published in 2002. It's similar to what's in Everyday Holiness, which is the book that you should all read, and some of his other works. But it's a really good summary of how the High Holy Days fit with all of this. Cheshbon HaNefesh is personal accounting, or literally accounting of the soul. Nefesh, by the way, in biblical Hebrew, nefesh simply means person or body. In late rabbinic Hebrew, it acquires the attribute of soul. So it is accounting of body and soul, depending on which stratum of Hebrew you're looking at for the sort of semantic field of the word nefesh. In modern, the soul piece overwhelms the body piece. So it's the real translation for us would be accounting of the soul, or soul reckoning. But it's a little bit more whole person than just soul, which is appropriate because soul may be your proclivities, but it's your whole body that either sins or does mitzvahs, right? The hand that writes the check, or the eye that glances in a positive or negative way, the legs that lead you to good or ill, etc. So, sorry, it just felt appropriate to complexify since we're defining Cheshbon HaNefesh. Accounting of the soul / soul plus. And we need an inner gaze for this to work that is deep and honest. And that's where Cheshbon HaNefesh comes in. Last paragraph here on page 3. The term gets used to describe any kind of inner stock taking, but there actually is a year-round way that is systematic, thorough, and very effective. So he is writing for people who already know the High Holy Days, and he's introducing Musar as a value added, right? If it already matters to you that from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, you focus on this, then I've got a year-round practice for you that's going to make it so much better and ultimately make you so much better, right? So done like that in a year-round, systematic, thorough, effective way, this practice, Musar, provides clear knowledge of the forces and contours of your own inner landscape. I love that. When you think about it this way, Musar is a diagnostic tool, right? Before X-ray, and then before CAT scan and sonogram, right? What could we actually know in real time about what's going on inside us? How do you possibly spot a 1 centimeter tumor when it would still be excisable before it starts to metastasize? The gifts of diagnostic tools cannot be overlooked. And using that analogy, if we really want to understand the forces and contours of our own inner landscape, we need a moral sonogram. We need a spiritual CT. And that's, in a sense, what this is. That interior world of personality, thought, wisdom, emotions, coupled with an eternal essence, personality, right, is what we call soul. And a rigorous process of soul accounting delivers that penetrating insight and change, which is what these high holy days are all about. And here's the overlap. So the book Cheshbon HaNefesh was written by, it was published in Lvov, but the important thing to know is this guy is from Santanov, outside of Lvov. So he is also known as the Santanover Rebbe, right? Or Menachem Mendel of Santanov. His last name was Leffin. It was probably Levin, and the V became an F somewhere along the way. You will see it written as Levin or Leffin or Santanov. It's the same guy, right? And it's a little extra interesting because Marinus doesn't go into this, but Menachem Mendel of Santanov was one of the leading early maskilim. Maskil from Haskalah, the Enlightenment. We talk a lot about a process that began, the first Enlightenment Jew gets credit as Moses Mendelssohn in the 1780s, roughly in Berlin. Right, where the big ideas, of course, started in Berlin and Paris and London. It took longer for them to get to the hinterlands. The urban-rural blue-red divide is an old one. By the 1810s or 20s, it started to penetrate a little into Eastern Europe, this idea that you could be an observant Jew, you could be deep into this, but you could also study Western philosophy, and you could combine the two. And really the groundwork for the explosive growth of Reform and other modern versions of Judaism is really a story of the Haskalah, because that's only the application. How religious you are, or what level of kashrut, or whether your rabbi gives a sermon in German or English, or whether there's an organ, those were the dividing lines in the 19th century. But the deeper question is, do you accept modernity as a source of ethics and insight alongside Torah? And that is the core notion of the maskilim. So Menachem Mendel of Santanov was an early maskil, and the ultra-Orthodox establishment hated him because he was leading people on this path that says, go study Plato, go to the university, study science, ask big questions. So it's all the more notable that Israel Salanter, who is considered the founder of modern Musar as a school and a discipline, in mid, like 1850s roughly was the height of his career, that he actually lined up a reprint of Cheshbon HaNefesh, which was already 30 years old or something, 40 years old at this point, and gave it his imprimatur. Usually the Orthodox rabbi imprimatur at the beginning of a republishing of another book is to say, this meets my exacting standards of religiosity. So if you are currently in my camp, you should read this. This is okay. And Salanter brought Cheshbon HaNefesh into the heart of his emerging school of Musar, even though it's rooted in those dangerous maskilic enlightenment questions. So much so that we know that Menachem Mendel of Santonov had read at least a summary in a European language of a book that had been published in, of all places, Philadelphia. Torah came from Benjamin Franklin to Menachem Mendel of Santonov to Rebbe Israel Salanter and into today's Musar. And the parallels between Franklin's writings on the virtues and other aspects of his, from Franklin's autobiography, and this emerging approach of examine your midot one at a time and go back through them, that is actually an American insight brought to Eastern Europe and entered into the traditional Orthodox European establishment as Musar grew. Fun fact. There's more on that in the subsequent pages if you want, but that's the key thing that I wanted to share. That Cheshbon HaNefesh is it's a book title that outlines a process that was core for the early development of Musar to take it seriously. The name already stood for High Holy Days. It already stood for living an examined ethical life. And it was a conscious choice on the part of this early liberal Orthodox maskil Enlightenment guy, Menachem Mendel of Leffin, to use that title and to say that this Ben Franklin idea, this emerging modern wisdom and psychology, though long before Freud, right? But this sort of growing sense that would lead to the social sciences of we've got to work on our thought patterns. We've got to work on that connection between where we put our energy and developing muscle memory for doing the right thing, not just studying the right thing. And High Holy Days already stand for that in our tradition. And then we have little hints of it daily, weekly, monthly, but really, what's the practice that's going to keep us focused on these virtues? How can we bring Moses and Ben Franklin together and combine these insights? And here's our answer. So this has been our exploration on it's actually the second to last Sunday of the new year, but the new year starts Sunday night, I believe, right? Or is it Monday night? I lose track. It's coming up really soon, but the point is next Sunday is like right before, and we're like making sure our white outfits are ready. But on this last Sunday with a little time to spare before Rosh Hashanah, this is simultaneously a deep dive into Shuva and some of the ways and the goads toward it. It's also a little bit of an advertisement for Musar practice, because Musar for 210 years, thank you, Monday night, yeah. Musar for 210 years, ever since Menachem Mendel of Santonov wrote this, has been billed as the way to make the High Holy Days less stressful, more meaningful, and more effective. Musar practice, Ben Franklin style, Menachem Mendel style, Yisrael Salanter style, is to focus on these virtues. And you do it by looking at your deeds, by doing this careful reckoning. At the end of the day, you ask, okay, how did that go? What interactions am I still kind of feeling in me? Where could I have been better at practicing compassion? Where could I have been better at practicing silence? Where could I have been better at practicing truth? And the midot, the attributes, also go to the opposites, the ones we often think of as bad, although necessary in some measure. Where was I angry unnecessarily? And where was my anger righteous? When I was full of myself, where was it because I knew I had a contribution to make that others were silencing me? Or where was I just coming from ego and pushed the point too long and took up too much space?
Humility.
Right? So later, Musar develops this idea that every midah, every attribute and its opposite need to be looked at because there's truth in every, but there's so many different ways of it of it playing out. So some of them, like mercy and justice, are in a sense direct opposites from each other. And that's about the creative tension. Others, the ratio needs to be much more one than another, like anava, humility, versus ga'ava, pride or hubris. Clearly, the Aristotelian mean needs to be much more toward humility, but that doesn't mean there isn't a time to be less humble. It's just that one's going to be 80-20 or 90-10, whereas justice and mercy are going to be 50-50. En route to trying to get those to be 100-100. The math doesn't work, but the spiritual math might, because justice and mercy are both such holy concepts. Right? I'm now summarizing all of Musar. There are questions about best ways to practice it and how often and how much we will do that in the life of Adat Shalom. That is a constant question, and I look forward to talking it through with some of you in leadership about how to do more Musar over the coming year. There are pieces of it that are ongoing, and we are absolutely going to plug in. Partly the lead up to the Reconstructionist Convention. We are not the only Reconstructionist shul that is thinking a lot about Musar, and you will hear Musar concepts in the various modules that are leading up to late March, when right across the river in Tyson's Corner, we host the International Recon Convention. A number of us are in loops with some of these leading Musar institutes, including the Musar Institute that Alan Marinus runs, and Great Torah coming from there. Also David Jaffe, who does very activist Torah. Fran and I had the opportunity to study directly with him, along with Rabbi Rachel and Marla Zippin. And they're now unveiling over the course of the year a new curriculum on Musar and racial justice, which combines the direct application to one of the core commitments that we make as a community in modernity with this very underpinning, right? And I'm being that specific only because I want to be clear. The soul accounting can go further. It's not only when you step back for a year and say, how generous was I? And did I collect my receipts right so that I can actually itemize all those donations? It's then breaking it down and of course going beyond, but just in this analogy and saying, how many of those donations were NAACP, Black Lives Matter, United Negro College Fund, etc.? How many of them reflect the reality that I was able to develop some of this wealth in this society by having lower odds of being pulled over for a traffic violation and incarcerated, and I was able to develop my career, right? And my ancestors had access to the GI Bill and could develop wealth through FHA mortgages that people of color were denied, et cetera. When you start to connect the dots, the big questions of systemic justice and injustice, including systemic racism, become categories for our cheshbon hanefesh. How can I have a full soul if I am living a life blind to all those vectors of privilege. What exactly we do with that is going to differ, and we can have great conversations about that, and we will. But the point is, David Jaffe and Yehuda Webster are onto something in creating a whole curriculum at the meeting point of Mussar and racial justice, because all of these systemic issues can only be tackled when we add a Mussar lens. If we start from a place of truth that includes the whole truth, we start from a place of compassion, we start from a place of humility, of stepping back and not assuming that I already have the answers, and a place of kavod, of honor for others that gives them the benefit of the doubt and lets them make their case before our defenses get up. Put all of that together, and that's what's needed for effective anti-racism work. So Mussar is not just, and thank you, both Heschel and Elie Wiesel were famous for a version of that quote: in a free society, some are guilty, all are responsible. Mussar helps us get there. It makes us better people in just how we communicate with those we love. It makes us better people in just living with insight and the lightness of knowing that we are trying to do right. But it also makes us better citizens, better contributors to the civic fabric. So Cheshbon HaNefesh, it's good stuff. Mussar, it's a good angle to make sure that we don't feel the stress of, oh my God, it's High Holy Days, and I'm glad I joined that webinar, but it's also overwhelming, right? Yes, but Mussar says, one step at a time, one midah, one attribute at a time, and build. And if you do that from now to next Rosh Hashanah, I promise you, just like Jerry's analogy, come to him or another CPA in early April. If you have been processing your receipts and looking for patterns all year long, then you will actually feel a sense of release when you go to file. And my blessing for all of us is a little bit this year and even more next year, now that you know all this, a sense of release when we stand in judgment at Rosh and at Yom. So that's what I got. There's more Torah on these pages. Read it if you like, or don't, and maybe I'll teach it again another time. But happy to be in discussion around anything that came up for you personally or programmatically. And any last questions or thoughts?
I just want to mention The Little Engine That Could. This was one of the favorite books that I used to read to my kids all the time. And I just think it's the way to approach all of this. I think I can. So it's the positive, it's having that positive attitude gives us the courage to stretch ourselves. When we're feeling beaten up because, boy, I'm such a screw up and I didn't do this right and I didn't do that right. You know, I don't know about any of you, but when I go through that kind of negativity, I just withdraw more. So I need that sort of kindness to myself in order to be willing to push the edges of my comfort zone.
Nice. Again, back to that balancing act of enough self-compassion to know that we've got this, and also enough self-criticism to actually get this, right? So yes, I think I can. Thank you so much. Phyllis.
Fran and I did not plan this, but I have just received a copy of a revision of the book that is called Three Little Engines. And the book has been revised by some incredible educators to move away from this metaphor that there is only one way to cross the mountain. If your kids weren't so old, Fred, I would give it to you, but it actually talks about 3 engines and 3 tracks and a multiple approach to life. So
Love
maybe
it.
I'll do a little video reading and, you know, share it with the community. The book is so new that it smells when I hold it up.
I think I can. I think you can, and I think they can. Absolutely lovely. And that's anava, right? That's the midah of humility, that my path is not the path, my knowledge is not absolute knowledge, and there may be other ways. And I may look at that and say, wow, I actually think your route is better than the one I was planning on taking. And that's part of the power of living in spiritual community. So thank you. Great metaphor. So blessings to all, and stay tuned, because we've got a lot of programs and services for some odd reason coming up in the coming weeks. I look forward to seeing you early and often, sometimes in person, often on screen, and keep me posted.
That's why they call it Labor Day, Fred. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Fabulous
Bye.
teaching,
Shana
Fred.
Tova.
Thank you so
Tavua
much,
Tov.
Fred. It was
Yeah.
beautiful. Great teaching.
Shana Tova.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
Shana Tova.
It was terrific.
Leitro.
Thank you.